the latest of our series of UK PACT webinars, and today I'm absolutely thrilled to have with us Professor Heejung Chung, who will be talking about flexible working and women's well-being. This is going to be a really relevant session for all members of UK PACT, so parents and carers, and I think, as I'm sure you've all been aware of Heejung's work, but there's lots to unpack with that work as well. We will get into that session momentarily. Before I do so, I've just got to highlight for you all, hopefully this works. Yeah, so we have next week is Carers Week, and so many of you in parents and carers networks, or specifically carers networks, may be aware that there are activities happening in your institutions next week. There are a couple of things happening at Northumbria. So we're having a listening session where we're going to be getting ideas and experiences from carers and inspired by some of the work that's happened in other institutions. And so if you wouldn't mind putting in some of your ideas, if you have got ideas that are happening in your local institutions, just in the chat, that would be really helpful, and we can maybe disseminate that afterwards so that we can kind of collectively learn what people are doing for carers in the future. Certainly it's something that I'm still learning about in more of a parents and carers space at Northumbria. And the other thing I wanted to flag, and this is just something I noticed today, is that there is a new report that's been produced looking specifically at carers' experiences in the higher education sector. It looks like a really valuable piece of research that's happened. And I've provided the link on the slide, but I can copy and paste that and put it into the chat for you all. I'm hoping that we may be able to hear from the authors of this report on one of our webinar sessions in the future. So in the meantime, if you want to have a look at they have a blog and then something you can download as a full report. So there's lots of valuable research that's happened there. It's a mixed methods approach. So they've done a large survey of over 1,000 people and done lots of interviews as well. So very valuable, because I think this is an area of research that is underserved. So certainly something that I'm really pleased to see, and we can hopefully build on that in the future. So thank you. I now am going to move directly on to our main topic of the day. So I've added in Heejung's picture, but also her book. I wanted to highlight that because it's a tremendous book. So something that I wanted to focus on for you all and to think about having a look at that yourselves. So before I get going, I'll just briefly introduce Heejung, just from the blurb. So Heejung, Professor Heejung Chung, is Director of the King's Global Institute for Women's Leadership and Professor of Work and Employment at King's College London. She is a comparative labour market researcher with a focus on flexible working, home remote working, future of work, and intersectional gender equality. She has over 2 decades of experience of research and teaching, has worked with both national, so UK, Korea, Germany, Italy, Estonia, etc., and international, so the European Commission, OECD, ILO, UN, etc., government agencies, so extremely extensive experience. She's published over 100 publications, including her recent book, so The Flexibility Paradox, which you can see, and a report, Flexible Working Arrangements and Gender Equality in Europe. And you can find out more about Heejung on her webpage, so heejungchung.com, and Blue Sky and LinkedIn as well. And those details are available as well in the invite that was sent around. But it's an absolute privilege to welcome Heejung to this talk, and we're really looking forward to hearing everything about flexible working and women's well-being. So thank you, Heejung. I'll stop sharing now and I'll pass over to you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mark. I'm going to start sharing the slides. I'm hoping that this will work, but bear with me. Teams has its own way of being. So wait, I will have to do this. I think, yes. Perfect. Is that all good? Yes, great. So yeah, thank you for inviting me. I do apologize. The title should actually have been more like, what is, flexible working, remote working means for well-being and inequalities, really, because I did think And I'll show you later how it's great to support women and women's gender equality because we still live in a patriarchy and there's inequality is nowhere near achieved. But sometimes it's more important to talk about some of these policies that are supporting all workers, which then helps tackle patriarchy and help women in the process. So I want this to be not just about women, but it's actually about all workers. And I will go into towards the end why we can't just focus very specifically on, let's say, for women. And again, there's a lot of backlash around DEI. And I think in a way, this is a very good context to have these kind of discussions. But first of all, like, was working from home all it was promised to be? There was this whole, and it still is, there's kind of this idea like, oh, like you get to sit in the garden, sip your coffee, not do much work and slack off, or, watch home runs with their hammers, or et cetera, et cetera. But as we know that actually a lot of us who are able to work from home have a hard time switching off. We're to the point where we're actually ending up harming our health, well-being, and possibly our work-life balance. And that's kind of what the flexibility paradox book was about. So the assumption that kind of flexible working was going to provide us with a whole range of different outcomes, including enhancing workers' well-being, work-family integration, as well as achieving gender equality, because when workers can gain control over work, when and where they work, that's just going to provide just this immense amount of benefits. But however, rather than that, it ends up with workers working everywhere and all the time. And one of the other things that the book really tries to do, because it's just as a kind of intersectional gender feminist scholar, like this whole issue around how that manifests itself differently across the gender roles and what it also kind of means for well-being. And well-being I wanted to take well-being as a mechanism. The book doesn't have as much well-being in it, but this is an area that I'm looking at more closely in recent years. So before I just want to talk about what flexible working is, and we're talking about, there's a whole range of different things, and in the UK and in many countries, flexible working was focused mostly on part-time work, but that's not what I'm talking about here. It's talking about flexible schedules, so flexi times, ending times of work. It's flexible working time autonomy, where work isn't defined by the number of hours per se, but it's much more flexible in terms of how many you do and how many you do per day or week, etc. And teleworking, which is working outside of your office space, mostly at home. And this also includes hybrid working, not full remote. Just briefly talk about this. So flexible working, flexible schedule is really widely spread. So this is 2015 data, which I am pretty sure that if you look at recent data in in 2025, this will be higher, but close to 50+% of workers in the Nordic countries have flexible schedules. Quarter of all Europeans across 28 European countries have flexible schedule, and in the UK, it's about 1 out of 3 workers. Obviously, you know that home working it wasn't very common in pre-pandemic times, but during the pandemic, it has risen quite significantly. And despite this whole notion about, return to office mandates, we see that since 2022, this is the LFS data, right? This is a labor force survey, which is possibly the largest survey we have of workers the data points you see is almost 1 million data points. Or close to 1 million data points here. And we see that the proportion of workers working from home, and this is the proportion of workers saying that they mainly work from home. So hybridly, at least kind of, I say 3 days plus or 60% plus, have stabilized around kind of 27-8%, depending on kind of the time, but around that time. And you see a little blip of men kind of maybe reducing here in the kind of end of 23, 24, but again, not a huge change as the media would like you to think. Recently, we've also looked at what workers will do when return to office mandates will be put in. This is if you are asked to come into the office 5 days a week, what are you going to do? One of the key things I want to highlight here is that working from home has really become the norm. So even up to the first quarter of 2022, workers largely said, oh, well, if we need to come back, we'll just come back, because we were still used to this old ways of working. Now in 2024, 2025, a lot of workers are saying, hell no, we ain't going back, because people have completely rearranged their lives so that home working is pivotal in maintaining kind of work-life balance. And one of the groups that have made this real rapid change is actually fathers and fathers of school-age children. And this is because for fathers of school-age children, I'm talking kind of 6 to about 17, the not toddlers and early years, but slightly older, it just absolutely opened up a possibility for fathers to be involved in childcare, allowing their partners, maybe with like male, female, or gender non-binary partners, to be able to get back into the work, but also enhance the financial stability of the family, really shifting the gender roles within the families. And it's just not something that fathers are willing to give up, to the point we see a 3-fold increase, 3 times increase in the number of fathers who say they will quit straight away if they're asked to come back into the office 5 days a week from 2022 to 2024. So what does flexible working allow? So again, flexible working, one of the biggest things that it does is allows people who were unable to work before into the labor market. We're talking mothers, we're talking disabled working, but also it enhances the capacities of ethnic minority workers, workers with informal care responsibilities, and also we have evidence around LGBT plus workers feeling more able to engage in the labor market through remote working, as well as having that online space. And we've done some research, especially around mothers, in terms of what happens when women have children, and then what happens if you give them the opportunity to work from home or work flexibly. They don't drop out of the labor market, and they are able to not move into part-time jobs. And part-time jobs being possibly one of the biggest reasons why there is a gender pay gap. This is huge. Flexible working can be really great for well-being for a number of reasons. I don't think I need to, I think I probably am speaking to the choir, so like preaching to the choir, so I'm not going to go into much detail, but essentially it's just reducing commuting times, you're able to kind of combine work, family, things together. It's great, it just makes people happier. Of course, it also, and I think this is one I want to emphasize, is that it is productive because it enhances well-being, enhances work-family integration. So because remote working, everybody wants to work remotely, these people have the highest loyalty, motivation, and commitment for their jobs, which we know directly impacts productivity levels. What is more, if you provide workers with possibility to lessen any stress around work family demands, you're just going to get more productive workers. And again, well-being is key into enhancing that productivity and workforce effectiveness. Having said that, and this is that big but that comes in, one of the patterns we see, and you don't have to read all the text, I'll just explain it to you. I'm going really fast because I was told I only have 20 minutes and I have a lot to cover. That sometimes these well-being outcomes are quite positive for men and sometimes fathers, but not necessarily mothers. And there is a big question mark as to why it is the case. And one of the reasons for that is because flexible working makes workers work longer and harder. So this is some of the analysis I've conducted kind of pre-pandemic, but I think there's been some studies that have been conducted post-pandemic that confirms this, is that, and I mean, your own lived experiences confirm this as well. So when we have blurring boundaries between work and family life, so when we went back into the office and you work from 9 to 5 or whatever time that you work, and you come back home, you're able to kind of shut it down, and then you're able to have that distance away from work. When we work from home, and I am as guilty or possibly the guiltiest person in this room to do this, when you're working from home, you don't have to leave to do something, right? So you're kind of in your workplace. So it creeps in. So rather than this popular notion that, they're slackers, they're doing their washing and they're watching TV. Actually, if you look at the data, people who work from home, work remotely, work flexible schedules, they work longer and they work harder. To the point where some of the data we see, like people do up to 2 hours more overtime when they start working flexibly. So these are not comparing two groups. Actually, it's the same person and you give them flexible working. What happens? Oh, they start working longer hours. They're also we are more likely to think about work when not at work and work during our free times, because again, that blurred boundary ends up with more work. And the reason for that, and I use this kind of idea of self-exploitation, and there's a whole range of reasons. one of which is that we're living in a very late stage capitalism where if you don't hustle, you're going to fall out of these, income, that security net. So there is a huge amount of competitiveness in the labor market. And with that, there's a bit of kind of, for those of you interested in kind of theory, like this Foucauldian idea of subjectification of kind of internalized capitalism. Our society is one where we define ourselves through work. We are kind of, wanting to be passionate about work, possibly because work doesn't actually pay that much anymore and it's insecure. So you have to have the internalized incentives to do so. And society kind of pushes us to do so. So in that sense, with that freedom over choosing when and where to work, you end up actually working harder. And this is especially true because you don't work because you need the money, which has actually been quite prevalent in the early stages, kind of 1956, even up to the 1980s. It was honorable to say you work because you need the money, but now you have to work because this is your passion, this is the way for self-fulfillment. So in this flexible boundaries or blurring boundaries between work and family life, private life, enables workers to work longer. And this is actually exploited by a lot of institutions or capitalism or managers, if you want, because through this passion, because it's the idea that, oh, well, you do it because you're passionate, so we don't really need to pay you because you want to do this. Academia is horrible, but, academia, professional services staff included. And again, this immense amount of insecurity and the perception that flexible workers are slackers obviously exacerbates this pattern. So this is why we see such an increase of work rather than decrease. But this pattern also is different depending on your gender. With the rise of this internalized capitalism or hustle culture, ideal worker culture, we also see an ideal parent culture, and especially mothering. And I'm talking about the intensive mothering kind of that we see across cultures, and even in the most kind of, even in kind of European countries now. And this also comes with the fact that increasingly our children's futures are very, very insecure. So and we are seeing a generation already from the millennials and zennials as well, but even more so in the future with the alphas, we are going to see children doing worse than their parents, unlike the Gen X generation and the baby boomers for sure. So parents are in a position where they have to invest in their children if they want their children to survive in this very late stage capitalism. And a lot of that pressure comes down to mothers and mothers' ability to do a lot of enrichment care, do, a mental load of managing and planning that child's life, what activities they need to do, etc. So in that context, flexible working actually pushes mothers to spend more time on childcare and housework, but mostly childcare due to those flexible boundaries. Now, one thing to note is that they don't necessarily not do the overtime I just talked about with flexible working. So what they do is they're able to work longer hours. They even do more overtime hours, but they also do more childcare. So given that we only have 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, it means something needs to give, and that is mostly their personal leisure time. So, or that they are doing a lot of multitasking between childcare and work as well. And some really amazing stories that Perry's done, and Andrews as well, is that they've looked at how mothers usually work in communal spaces, so the dining room table, whilst maybe doing housework and childcare, whereas men or fathers, again, due to that gender normative view that they're the breadwinners and they're the more important, and then usually they are the more higher earners in many cases. They're the ones that are in the office, closed doors, kind of focusing on paid work. In that sense, this is why I say in the book, and in many other papers that I wrote, because I just wanted to get the message through, is that flexible working, rather than being some sort of a miraculous silver bullet to address gender equality, has actually been a way to exploit as much labor, both paid labor and unpaid labor, out of women, to the point where we're able to exploit the paid labor elements out of women without disrupting the notion of what a good productive worker looks like, which is based on the 1950s breadwinner model, which we assume that this worker has a wife at home who does all their reproductive work, so cooking, cleaning, taking care of children, even taking care of my GP appointments, yada, yada. But also, we haven't disrupted the division of labor or gender roles at home, where we just assume that it will be the mothers who do it. So flexible working has allowed for mothers to do all that whilst also taking part in the labor market, which obviously does not result in positive outcomes for their well-being. Just to kind of put that negative story even stronger, that there is also a possibility that they're going to be stigmatized more when they work from home because of the cultural assumption and actually empirical, evidence that they might be doing more of that housework, and that when people work flexibly, rather than getting bonuses, they might get penalization of their careers. The evidence is a bit mixed because, and this has also to do with the way that the data was collected. But even post-pandemic, we do see that there's a huge amount of stigma bias against remote workers' commitment, motivation, as well as their chances for promotion. What we also find is that the gaps when you work from home more often, let's say not 1, 2, but 3, 4 days a week from home, is harder, but then it may be harder on fathers, but only because it goes against their image of the breadwinner. So fathers are, and we've talked about like fathers are less likely to be able to work part-time because of this kind of image of fathers as breadwinners and not having care responsibilities. But we kind of have an evidence that when fathers work from home, they may face harsher kind of stigma. But it also is because mothers start off at such a low point that there is nothing else. You can't go lower than that, so that's another reason. But more importantly, and this is what I wanted to talk about, and I mentioned in the beginning of the talk, is that when we start talking about policies as something just for parents or just for mothers more so, that's when it becomes really bad for everyone. So when you say policy is for workers, it just assumes that this cannot be a smart working, productive, smart working policy, that this is only for DEI, it's only for gender equality, only for, kind of work-life balance. And this is when workers get mostly penalized. And this is why when we start talking about these policies, we can't talk about this benefit just women, because it doesn't. And it also needs to be kind of opened right for all workers, where you have policies for all workers, that penalization is reduced significantly. How much time do I have? I didn't quite see, do I have 5 more minutes? Is that what it was?
5 minutes is fine. Yep,
okay. The last thing, kind of final thing, there's other sides, but I'm not going to go too much into it. The one thing that I also wanted to talk about, especially with regards to well-being, is the whole digital presenteeism. So digital presenteeism is the behavior of employees who feel compelled to maintain a constant, instant, visible online presence in the digital workspace. And it could be Teams, it could be Zoom, chat, whatever. And this is actually something that's been kind of increasing a lot in a lot of, it's like white collar office work, but also maybe blue collar as well. For those who are even in the gig economy, you have to be always available for that next gig to come in. So it's across self-employed as well as employees alike. And obviously, it has huge implications for well-being because a physical and mental detachment away from work is absolutely crucial for workers' well-being as well as productivity. But we don't seem to quite understand that. And also with managers, and I'm a manager myself, is that on one hand, you're like, yes, my workers need that boundary for their well-being, but you also want them to be available, on your beck and call. So there's that kind of paradoxical pattern that we see there. And one of the things we wanted to see also is who's getting these kind of, who's feeling this more, who's feeling this pressure more. And so we ran some data using a large-scale kind of periodical data source that we conduct. And I'm just skip. I won't talk about the first 2 ones, but the one on the very right, we've asked people, how often do you feel that pressure to be always constantly on and respond straight away? So 25% said never, so that's fine. And this is not just home workers, but workers who work from home and also work in the office, because this is also for people who work in the office as well. 25% rarely. So 50% says never or rarely, but then another good 50% say at least sometimes. And what do we find? It is those who are working from home who feel this pressure more often. Because again, it's because of the stigma. It's just that managers can't see you work, then they have to, if they can't see you work in the office, you need to be showing them online. You have to be showing up to, FaceTiming them online. And this is a way that home workers do it. This is not a good graph. I wish I had another graph, but I don't have it yet. It's another thing is that it's also parents. And I think it's mothers. It's mothers who actually feel this pressure more because mothers, like myself, we are the ones whose work capacity, especially when working from home, is going to be judged. And we see that it's going to be judged anyways. So you have to show up. But also it's the kind of the emotional, the cultural norm about women needing to be kind and nice, etc. And I think this is why people are doing more of that digital presenteeism so that you don't piss anyone off. And it's ethnic minority workers as well. Again, because there's the assumption is that they don't do it, that they're not really working. So you have to overperform to get away from the bias. And so we've now conducted also managers' perception as well. And what the funny thing is, ethnic minority workers are the ones that are doing more of the presenteeism behavior or feeling the pressure to, but managers don't expect them to because they just assume they have this unconscious bias against ethnic minority workers because they think we are slackers. I mean, not necessarily me, but anyways. And behind that is the ideal worker norm and flexibility stigma. These are just to show that, just to give you an idea what this means is, it's especially where there's high levels of flexibility stigma. This is where you see the mothers really stand out in terms of engaging in digital presenteeism behavior, whereas that doesn't really shape the outcomes of childless men and women. They're like, I don't care. Like they're just pretty similar. It doesn't change much in terms of this presenteeism. Whereas mothers, when they feel that there's stigmatized views against home workers, that's when they do more digital presenteeism. Because I'm going to run out of time, I'm just going to say there's a lot of things we need to do: stronger rights, changing gender roles. I think gender roles has a huge impact on this. So we have to support fathers' use of flexible working and shared parental leaves, etc. But most importantly, we need to change the ideal worker model. I think a lot of the problem has to do with the way we think about a worker. Even in today's day, we're still very much based on this antiquated idea of productivity, antiquated ideas about commitment, that to be able to be productive and committed, you have to be always on, always available, prioritize work, has no other responsibilities outside of work, which is again based on this middle-class white male breadwinner. And I'm sorry to say that male breadwinner does not exist even within men. Only a small fraction of maybe very high earning men may meet this, but no one has a wife at home who could take care of everything, like not even men. So we need to revisit, remake, revision this idea of the standard worker where we don't measure through hours worked. We really focus on outputs and we really trust workers that they will do what they need to do when they have that freedom and control over their work. And also, I think we need to revisit the hours of work in general, like because 40 hours doesn't really work. Like I can't see how two people working 40 plus hours a week can take care of children, take care of themselves, take care of their elderly parents, especially the baby boomers are now retiring. Someone needs to take care of them, and it ain't going to be the state from what it looks like. So yeah, we're really looking in this crisis of care, and to be able to meet all that, we need to start thinking about reducing hours of work. So that's it. So yeah, looking forward to the questions and comments.
Thank you so much, Heejung. That was brilliant. And sorry for the short amount of time because there's a lot to get through, but that was really brilliant and comprehensive study. So I open the floor. I'll just stop the recording now.